What if the heir to the British throne suddenly found himself fighting for his life? Imagine the shockwaves rippling through the palace. Hallways usually filled with quiet protocol now alive with panic, doctors running, alarms ringing. That was the scene the royal family faced when Prince William, the future king, was rushed to the hospital under circumstances that have left everyone, from his closest family to palace staff, in utter disbelief. In that instant, the familiar image of the poised, composed royal broke into something far more vulnerable. The man who has spent decades in the public eye, often projecting strength and calm, was suddenly human in the most terrifying way imaginable. And the question that no one could answer immediately was, how did it come to this? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The story starts in what appeared to be an ordinary morning at Kensington Palace. The corridors were quiet, servants moving about in their usual methodical manner, the royal children preparing for school, and Prince William himself attending to his schedule filled with engagements, briefings, and calls. But beneath the surface of normality, a storm was brewing. The details of that morning remain murky, partially concealed by palace confidentiality, partially shrouded in conflicting reports. What is clear, however, is that something unprecedented occurred, a series of events that would send shockwaves not only through the royal family, but across the globe. At 9:43 a.m., according to sources close to the palace, a frantic call went out to the private royal medical team. Security personnel, often unseen but always vigilant, were suddenly in full alert. Doors that normally welcomed dignitaries were now slammed shut. Corridors that usually echoed with soft footsteps were filled with hurried shuffles and anxious voices. You can almost picture it. The stoic security officers, trained for crisis, now exchanging grim looks, a tension thicker than any royal velvet drapery. Why was this happening? The palace has faced many crises over the centuries, scandals, sudden deaths, political controversies, but this was different. This was personal. This was health. And the stakes could not have been higher. Prince William, the father, the husband, the future king, was in immediate danger, and every second counted. Even the most seasoned advisors and security personnel admitted privately that they had never seen anything like it. And yet, the public would only learn fragments of what was unfolding behind those palace walls. As the call for emergency support went out, Kate, the Duchess of Cambridge, was reportedly summoned to William's side. Imagine the panic, the fear that must have gripped her, a partner in critical condition, a family on the brink of public scrutiny, and the crushing weight of royal expectation. She had always been portrayed as composed and graceful, but moments like these strip away every layer of ceremony, every shield of poise. In the privacy of those palace halls, there were tears, whispered prayers, and frantic attempts to maintain control over a situation spiraling out of anyone's grasp. And what about the children? George, Charlotte, and Louis, young, impressionable, and seeing their father in distress. While the public would never witness the intimate moments of their family, insiders suggest the scene was heartbreaking. Children absorbing fear they do not fully understand, parents trying to shield them while their own hearts race. It is a human story as much as it is a royal one, and it forces us to confront something we often forget. Behind the pomp, the protocols, and the public appearances, these are real people, subject to the same vulnerabilities, fears, and emergencies as the rest of us. But the palace is not a hospital, and no one expected the usual calm of the royal morning to transform into what became a full-blown emergency. Ambulances were called, medical teams were alerted, and a rapid response plan was enacted. Sources report that the ride to the hospital was tense, the air filled with a mix of professional efficiency and palpable fear. Doctors assessed William's condition with meticulous attention, but even they acknowledged that the situation was unusual, delicate, and fraught with uncertainty. It is one thing to treat a patient in a hospital. It is another to handle the heir to the throne, whose very presence carries centuries of expectation, tradition, and symbolism. What caused this emergency? There are whispers of multiple contributing factors: stress, exhaustion, possible health complications. But what has shocked insiders most is the sequence of events leading up to this moment. Allegedly, there were incidents that would have unnerved anyone: let alone a man burdened with the future of a monarchy. Decisions made in the public eye, pressures to uphold appearances, and private moments of vulnerability combined into a perfect storm. And while the media frenzy would focus on speculation, palace staff knew that the reality was far more complex and far more dangerous than any headline could capture. The morning's events were only the beginning. As William was stabilized and escorted into the hospital, the palace faced a dual challenge: ensuring his safety and controlling the narrative. Royals are always under scrutiny, but this time, the stakes were unprecedented. For decades, palace protocols have managed crises, but emergencies involving the heir to the throne are rare, extremely rare, and they carry a weight that can ripple across nations. Every decision, every statement, every movement was calculated not just for medical efficacy, but for the preservation of the royal image. Yet even with meticulous planning, the raw human fear, the immediate threat to life, cannot be contained by protocol alone. Meanwhile, inside the hospital, doctors worked tirelessly to assess William's condition. Staff described a scene filled with urgency, precision, and quiet tension. Every test, every observation carried monumental weight. In situations like this, medical professionals often balance the science of treatment with the delicate nature of their patient, who is not just any patient, but a symbol, a figure whose well-being impacts an entire nation. And in the palace, family members were left grappling with emotions they could not openly express. The contrast between private despair and public expectation is stark in royal life, and it was on full display in these hours. As the news began to leak, social media erupted. The public's curiosity collided with concern, creating a storm of speculation, fear, and fascination. Headlines screamed urgency, tweets questioned the details, and royal commentators dissected every known fact. Yet for all the noise, the true story was still unfolding behind closed doors. The palace, true to form, controlled the information carefully, releasing only what was necessary to prevent widespread panic while ensuring that speculation did not spiral into chaos. But even the most seasoned advisors could not predict the global attention this incident would attract. And this is where the story becomes even more gripping. The layers of secrecy, the hidden triggers, and the underlying tensions that culminated in this crisis are only now being revealed. Insiders speak of a series of occurrences so unusual, so alarming, that they terrified even the most experienced palace staff. Every step of the way, there were moments of shock, disbelief, and, yes, tears. The palace, often seen as a fortress of composure, revealed a vulnerability that few outside its walls had ever witnessed. By now, you may be asking yourself, what exactly happened to William? Was it an accident, a sudden medical crisis, or something far more complicated? The truth is, it is all of these, and more. The full story intertwines personal health, family dynamics, palace pressures, and events that, until now, remained hidden from public view. And the revelations, when fully revealed, are nothing short of extraordinary. They will challenge your assumptions about the royal family, expose the human side of monarchy, and leave you questioning what you thought you knew about the life of Prince William. But even as the palace braces for what comes next, one fact is undeniable. This is not just a story about a royal emergency. It is a story about vulnerability, responsibility, and the immense pressures faced by someone born to inherit a role that carries centuries of expectation. It is about the people who love him, the staff who protect him, and the global audience that watches every move. And as the hours passed, as doctors worked, and as family members held their breath, everyone knew one thing with terrifying clarity: nothing would ever be the same again. Yet, in the midst of this crisis, one detail remains a mystery: the exact trigger for William's sudden hospitalization. Was it a culmination of months of stress, a hidden health issue, or something no one could have predicted? The palace has remained tight-lipped, issuing carefully worded statements that raise more questions than they answer. And this is where the story truly begins, because the events that follow, the decisions made, and the revelations uncovered are unlike anything the royal family has faced in recent memory. And so, as the morning turned into afternoon and the palace remained on edge, one question loomed over everyone present: what would happen next? How would the family cope? And how would the public react to a situation that had begun in secrecy but now threatened to capture the world's attention? But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What happens when an ordinary morning suddenly becomes extraordinary in the most terrifying way? Imagine the corridors of Kensington Palace, usually serene and orderly, transformed into a hive of chaos. Footsteps echoing down long hallways, whispered conversations interrupted by hurried instructions, staff rushing with a sense of urgency they had never experienced before. This was the day everything changed, the day Prince William's life hung in a delicate balance, and the palace faced a crisis that no protocol could have fully prepared it for. The day began like any other, or so it seemed. William had a schedule full of engagements, meetings with advisors, and private calls that demanded his attention. Kate was overseeing the morning routines of George, Charlotte, and Louis, ensuring the children were ready for school, while the household staff moved with their typical quiet precision. But beneath the polished surface of palace life, a storm was gathering, invisible to most. William, though composed as always in public, was grappling with pressures and tensions that few outsiders could imagine. Years of expectation, a lifetime of scrutiny, and recent events had accumulated into something dangerously volatile. Sources reveal that the first signs of trouble were subtle. Perhaps it was a missed heartbeat in conversation, a tremor unnoticed by most, or a momentary lapse in focus during a briefing. But to those who knew him best, something felt off. And then, suddenly, the subtle became undeniable. Staff noticed a shift, a tension that could not be ignored. William, the future king, was showing signs of distress that no one could simply dismiss. Within minutes, the palace transformed. The staff, trained for protocol and decorum, now faced the reality of emergency. Security personnel were mobilized, doctors alerted, and a chain of communication that normally handled state matters was redirected to handle a personal crisis of unprecedented magnitude. Doors that were usually open to ceremonial traffic were slammed shut. Corridors that normally echoed with quiet conversation became corridors of frantic movement. Every step, every gesture, carried the weight of urgency. The palace, so often a symbol of control and tradition, was suddenly unmoored. What makes a crisis like this so intense is not just the medical concern, but the personal stakes. Kate, often the calm center in public appearances, found herself swept into the maelstrom. Imagine her perspective. Her partner suddenly incapacitated, their children vulnerable, and the eyes of the world potentially watching every move. Inside the palace, there were tears, whispered words of reassurance, and frantic attempts to maintain composure while chaos unfolded around them. The human element, the fear, the helplessness, was as raw as any royal scandal, but infinitely more personal. Even as staff scrambled to coordinate, questions raced through the minds of those closest to William. How did this happen? Was it sudden, or the result of unseen pressures building over time? Could they have prevented it? These questions are familiar to anyone facing unexpected crises, yet amplified exponentially when the stakes involve someone destined to inherit the crown. Every decision mattered, not just for his immediate survival, but for the stability of the monarchy itself. Every second counted. Inside the palace, time seemed to stretch. Minutes became hours, measured not by clocks, but by the intensity of the emergency. Medical personnel arrived, assessing William's condition, while advisors coordinated logistics for transport. The atmosphere was tense, almost surreal, as those accustomed to formality navigated the stark reality of fear. Security personnel, who are often invisible to the public, played a critical role, maintaining perimeter control while also assisting in the emergency response. Their usual stoicism gave way to palpable concern, revealing the gravity of the situation. William himself, by all accounts, displayed a quiet resilience even in distress. Witnesses report that he remained aware, though clearly struggling, processing instructions and communicating with staff despite the severity of his condition. This composure, juxtaposed with the urgency around him, created a tension that was almost cinematic. How does someone remain calm in such moments? For William, it was both instinct and training, yet the human vulnerability beneath it all was unmistakable. Meanwhile, the palace staff faced another layer of challenge: discretion. Royals operate in a world of intense scrutiny, and a medical emergency of this magnitude required both immediate action and careful information management. Rumors could spread instantly. Misinterpretations could inflame public concern. As staff coordinated with medical teams and security, they also managed communications, issuing statements designed to inform without inciting panic. It is a delicate balance, one few outside the palace can truly appreciate. And then came the phone call that would change everything. An urgent alert went out, signaling that the situation required hospital intervention. Security and medical teams coordinated to ensure a safe, rapid, and discreet transfer. Imagine the scene. Vehicles prepared, corridors cleared, staff moving with precision, the weight of centuries of tradition pressing against the immediacy of human crisis. William was moved with care, every action deliberate, every decision critical. Yet even with meticulous planning, uncertainty remained. The children, far too young to understand fully, were shielded from the full intensity of the events. But the adults around them were acutely aware of the fragility of life in that moment. Kate reportedly stayed close, alternating between reassurance, emotional support, and coordination with staff. Charles, William's father, was reportedly on edge, trying to manage both personal fear and public expectation. Even seasoned palace staff admitted to feeling unsettled, confronted with a scenario they had never anticipated. As William was transported to the hospital, the public remained largely unaware. The palace's discretion kept the situation contained, though rumors began to surface almost immediately. Social media buzzed with speculation, and news outlets scrambled for confirmation. But the reality was that those inside the palace knew far more than the world could see. The juxtaposition of private panic and public calm is a recurring theme in royal life, but rarely has it been so stark. Yet even in the hospital, the story was far from over. Doctors assessed William, ran tests, and monitored vitals, but the severity of his condition remained uncertain. Staff described moments of tension where seconds seemed to stretch into eternity. Each finding was a potential clue, each anomaly a source of concern. And as the family waited, the emotional toll intensified. This was not a hypothetical situation. This was not a rehearsal. This was real, and the outcomes were unknown. Throughout the day, palace advisors worked tirelessly, coordinating between family, staff, and medical teams. Decisions had to be made quickly, balancing risk with necessity. How much information to release? Which protocols to follow? How to manage family members' emotions without compromising public perception? Every choice carried weight, and every misstep could have long-term consequences. The human element, the fear, the uncertainty, the raw emotional stakes, was ever present. Amidst the chaos, one thing became clear. The events of this day would leave an indelible mark. For William, the experience would be a stark reminder of mortality and vulnerability. For Kate, Charles, and other family members, it was a moment of profound fear and helplessness. For palace staff, it was an unprecedented test of skill, discretion, and composure. And for the public, the eventual revelations would challenge perceptions of the royal family as invulnerable, distant, or untouchable. The day, which had begun as ordinary, had transformed into a defining moment. Every decision, every reaction, every emotional response contributed to the unfolding drama. William's life, the family's stability, and the palace's reputation all hung in delicate balance. And yet, despite the careful coordination, despite the expertise of medical teams and palace staff, one lingering question persisted. What had triggered this crisis? Was it purely medical, or were there deeper, hidden factors at play, pressures, events, or secrets that no one had anticipated? As the evening approached, the palace remained on high alert. William was stable, but still in critical condition. Kate, Charles, and other close family members stayed by his side, navigating a blend of hope, fear, and uncertainty. The staff, though exhausted, continued to maintain protocols, ensuring both the physical safety of William and the integrity of the palace's operations. And yet, even as control was partially regained, one truth became increasingly evident. This day would not be forgotten. The events of the morning and afternoon had reshaped the palace, leaving emotional ripples that would last far beyond the immediate crisis. But what exactly had led to William's sudden collapse? The answer was hidden, a puzzle that no one outside the palace could yet see. Reports hinted at stress, fatigue, and perhaps underlying health complications, but insiders whispered of something far more complex. Something that, when revealed, would explain the intensity of the palace's response, the emotional upheaval of the family, and the unprecedented nature of the crisis itself. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What does it feel like when a palace, usually a symbol of order and centuries of meticulous protocol, erupts into chaos? Imagine the grand halls of Kensington suddenly filled with hurried footsteps, shouted instructions, and a tension so thick you could slice it with a knife. This was the scene when news of Prince William's sudden medical crisis reached the palace staff and family. What began as a subtle concern, a misplaced glance, a faltering step, a faint sign of distress, had now exploded into a full-blown emergency. And in those moments, every single person inside the walls knew the stakes. The life of the future king hung in the balance. The panic began almost imperceptibly. Staff who had been trained for emergencies sprang into action. Security personnel, usually stoic and methodical, were suddenly racing down corridors, their faces tight with urgency. Doctors were summoned, medical equipment rushed into place, and lines of communication opened up instantly, connecting palace staff, medical teams, and senior advisors. It was the orchestration of decades of planning, but with a rawness and unpredictability that no training could have fully prepared them for. Kate, the Duchess of Cambridge, was at the epicenter of this storm. Those close to her say she displayed a combination of calm decisiveness and quiet desperation. Imagine trying to shield her children from the panic, all while coordinating with palace staff, medical personnel, and security. Sources report that she alternated between giving precise instructions and comforting aides who were visibly shaken. She had to maintain composure, not for herself alone, but for everyone around her, because in moments like this, one crack in confidence can ripple outward, amplifying fear. And yet, despite the controlled chaos, cracks began to appear. Staff who had handled emergencies before admitted privately that this was different. Usually, palace crises involved external events. Protests, media leaks, or ceremonial mishaps. This was intimate. This was personal. This was the heir to the throne facing a life-threatening situation, and the human fear surrounding it could not be mitigated by protocol alone. There were moments when assistants wept quietly in corners, when a guard's hands shook as he relayed messages, when a doctor's usually precise instructions were delivered with an undercurrent of worry that betrayed the gravity of the situation. The palace's security system, usually a silent and efficient machine, was now operating at full alert. Access points were sealed, routes cleared, and every movement meticulously controlled. The goal was dual: protect the prince and prevent any external observation of the unfolding crisis. But the tension was palpable. Even the normally calm staff members were aware that, in moments like these, a single misstep could have catastrophic consequences. The stakes were not just life and death, they were the public perception of the monarchy itself. Meanwhile, within the palace, whispers began to circulate. What exactly had triggered the emergency? Some suggested sudden medical complications, perhaps a fainting spell or an underlying condition exacerbated by stress. Others hinted at accumulated fatigue, the relentless schedule, and the immense pressure of royal life. But there were also darker, more enigmatic rumors, incidents that might never be publicly confirmed but that insiders hinted contributed to the crisis. Every theory, every speculation, heightened the sense of urgency. And as the palace staff scrambled to act, they were forced to manage both reality and rumors simultaneously. Time moved differently in those moments. Seconds felt like minutes, minutes like hours. Every door opened, every step taken, carried with it the weight of consequence. The usually serene atmosphere of Kensington Palace had been replaced with a sense of immediacy, a tension that could not be quelled. Even long-serving staff, accustomed to the unique pressures of royal life, admitted that they had never seen anything like it. At the center of it all was William himself. Reports suggest he remained conscious and aware, yet visibly struggling. Witnesses describe moments when he attempted to communicate instructions, provide reassurance, or simply acknowledge those around him, all while grappling with physical and emotional stress. His composure, even in crisis, was remarkable, but it could not mask the seriousness of the situation. For those observing, it was a stark reminder that no matter how elevated one's position, vulnerability is universal. Family members, too, felt the full brunt of panic. Kate reportedly remained by his side, coordinating, comforting, and advocating. Charles and other close relatives, though physically distant in some accounts, were involved in constant communication, their concern palpable. Those present described the emotional intensity as almost overwhelming. Tears, whispered prayers, frantic pacing. These were the hallmarks of a palace in crisis, human emotions breaking through centuries of tradition and decorum. And as the minutes stretched, the need for swift action became undeniable. Medical teams prepared for immediate transport to a hospital capable of handling the heir to the throne. Every logistical detail had to be flawless: the route, the personnel, the security. There was no room for error. Sources described the planning as meticulous, executed with the precision of a military operation, yet with the weight of personal stakes that no drill or training could replicate. What's striking about this panic is how it exposed the human side of monarchy. The palace, often perceived as a bastion of control and perfection, revealed its vulnerability. The staff's fear, the family's emotional struggle, and the sheer unpredictability of life converged into a scene that was raw, unfiltered, and deeply compelling. For the public, who normally only see carefully curated appearances, this was a glimpse into the reality behind the headlines. Even the future king is not immune to crisis. In the midst of all this, the children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, were being shielded from the worst of the emergency. Insiders suggest that Kate made deliberate efforts to maintain routines and calm while also preparing for potential outcomes. But even the most careful shielding could not fully erase the tension. Children, particularly those as perceptive as royal children, absorb emotion from their environment. Witnessing fear, even indirectly, can leave lasting impressions. This added another layer of urgency: the need to stabilize the situation not just medically, but emotionally. As the palace mobilized, the wider world remained largely unaware. Rumors began to trickle out, social media buzzed with speculation, and the press scrambled to uncover details. But the palace maintained strict control, releasing only the most essential statements, carefully worded to avoid panic while acknowledging concern. The contrast between private panic and public restraint created an almost cinematic tension as the palace staff navigated a dual reality, managing an immediate threat while preserving an image of composure and continuity. Even as medical preparations were underway, questions loomed large. What had caused this sudden deterioration in William's condition? Was it purely physical, a sudden health crisis? Or were there external pressures, accumulated stress, or even unforeseen incidents that precipitated this moment? Insiders hint at a combination of factors, each contributing to a perfect storm that few could have predicted. And as every layer of the crisis unfolded, the palace confronted a reality that is rarely acknowledged publicly. Even royalty, with all its resources and support, is vulnerable. By the time William was ready for hospital transport, the palace had fully entered crisis mode. Staff were exhausted, emotionally strained, yet every action remained precise. Kate, ever the anchor, continued to balance her own emotions with the needs of those around her. Charles and other advisors monitored communications, prepared for contingencies, and coordinated with medical teams. And through it all, the question persisted: how would the world react once news became public? The panic at the palace was not merely about immediate danger. It was about control, perception, and the fragile balance between private vulnerability and public expectation. Every movement, every instruction, every whispered reassurance carried weight. The staff's fear mirrored the family's worry, creating a feedback loop of tension that underscored the seriousness of the situation. And while the palace eventually regained a measure of control, the emotional imprint of those hours would linger long after. Yet the most pressing question remained unanswered. What exactly triggered the crisis that had thrown the palace into such panic? Was it a health complication, a cascade of stressors, or an event so unexpected it caught everyone off guard? The answer, insiders suggest, is far more intricate and alarming than anyone outside the palace could imagine. And as William was transported, as Kate and family members braced for the unknown, one truth became undeniable. The events of this day would redefine how the palace, the family, and the public viewed vulnerability, crisis, and the humanity behind the crown. And just when it seemed the palace had begun to regain composure, a new, shocking development emerged, one that would amplify the panic to levels no one anticipated. What if the crisis that shook Kensington Palace was not caused by a single event, but by a series of hidden pressures and triggers that had been quietly building for years? What if the perfect storm that led to Prince William's hospitalization was rooted not just in immediate health concerns, but in layers of stress, family tension, and circumstances no one outside the palace could fully understand? To truly grasp why the day spiraled into panic, we need to look behind the polished walls and pristine lawns and examine the forces quietly at work. Forces that, once revealed, shock even those who have followed the royal family for decades. The first hidden trigger was the relentless weight of expectation. William, as the future king, carries a burden that is almost unimaginable. Every public appearance, every charitable initiative, every decision is scrutinized not just by the media, but by history itself. The palace, for all its grandeur and centuries of tradition, is also a place where perfection is demanded and mistakes are rarely forgiven. Sources suggest that William had been under increasing pressure in recent months to balance royal duties with personal and family responsibilities, a balance that became increasingly difficult under the public gaze. Insiders describe a buildup of stress that many might overlook. For instance, the demands of public engagements, ranging from long hours at events to meeting with international dignitaries, can be physically exhausting. Add to that the invisible pressures, decisions about policy, charity initiatives, and family matters, all under intense scrutiny. One palace staffer, speaking on condition of anonymity, noted that it's not just the public duties, it's the constant, unrelenting mental load. Every choice, every glance, every word is measured. Over time, even someone as disciplined as William could reach a breaking point. Another hidden trigger appears to have been a series of personal stressors that, while private, significantly affected his well-being. Family dynamics play a role. The relationship between William and his siblings, particularly Prince Harry, has been under tension for years. Disagreements and unresolved conflicts, when combined with public media coverage and the expectation to present a united front, create emotional strain. Staff report that William had been privately expressing frustration over ongoing tensions, which contributed to a sense of being stretched too thin, emotionally and mentally. Compounding the issue was the pressure of fatherhood. George, Charlotte, and Louis are young, and their care requires not just time but emotional energy. Sources describe William attempting to maintain an active, nurturing presence in their lives despite the demands of royal duties, a task that left him increasingly fatigued. Kate, deeply committed to balancing family life and public expectations, reportedly carried her own stress, which added to the emotional atmosphere at home and in the palace. The interwoven pressures created an invisible strain that insiders say contributed significantly to the crisis. But it wasn't just emotional or familial stress. Physical factors played a role as well. Sources hint at health challenges that may have been quietly managed or overlooked. The specifics remain confidential, but palace insiders suggest that a combination of exhaustion, potential underlying conditions, and the physical demands of public life contributed to William's sudden deterioration. Unlike a private citizen, a royal cannot simply step back and rest. The public expects consistent presence, and the family must maintain appearances even during moments of personal vulnerability. Add to this the unpredictable nature of external events. Recent controversies, public criticisms, and media scrutiny added layers of tension. Each headline, each commentary, added to the invisible weight on William's shoulders. Insiders note that while many royals develop resilience to public opinion, the accumulation of negative attention can still affect mental and physical well-being, particularly when combined with the private pressures of family responsibilities and ceremonial duties. And yet, perhaps the most critical hidden trigger was the palace environment itself. Kensington, while iconic and luxurious, operates under rigid routines and hierarchies. Staff are trained to prioritize discretion, protocol, and order, sometimes at the expense of addressing small but accumulating stressors among those they serve. In William's case, minor stressors, a last-minute engagement, a difficult briefing, subtle tension among staff, may have compounded over weeks or months, quietly contributing to a threshold that was finally breached on that fateful day. There were also unusual events in the immediate period leading up to the hospitalization. Sources report a series of occurrences that, while individually minor, collectively contributed to heightened tension. An unexpected delay in a critical briefing, a miscommunication during a family event, and even a sudden shift in security protocols, all minor on their own, created a cascade effect. William, already balancing immense responsibilities, may have experienced these cumulative pressures as overwhelming. Each small stressor acted like a pebble in a shoe, increasingly uncomfortable until it became impossible to ignore. Insiders also point to an element rarely discussed: the psychological impact of isolation. While surrounded by staff, advisors, and family, royals often operate under intense scrutiny, making genuine privacy nearly impossible. The lack of safe spaces to express fear, frustration, or vulnerability can exacerbate stress, leaving even the most disciplined individuals susceptible to sudden collapse. Those close to William suggest that in the days before the hospitalization, he had been exhibiting signs of fatigue and subtle tension that may have gone unnoticed in public appearances but were visible to those around him. And then there is the role of timing. The palace operates under schedules that are often non-negotiable. Yet, according to sources, the sequence of events that day, unexpected meetings, sudden interruptions, and the convergence of multiple responsibilities, created a perfect storm. By the time the crisis reached its peak, William was balancing accumulated physical fatigue, emotional strain, and the immediate pressure of unforeseen events, all in a compressed period that left little room for recovery or intervention. What makes this revelation so striking is the contrast between public perception and private reality. To the world, William often appears composed, calm, and unflappable. Yet insiders reveal that beneath that veneer lies a complex web of pressures, some visible, some hidden, some nearly impossible to articulate. These hidden triggers, converging on that critical day, transformed what might have been a manageable situation into an emergency that threw the palace into panic. And as the crisis unfolded, those same hidden triggers continued to shape the response. Staff and medical teams were reacting not just to immediate symptoms, but to the broader context of accumulated stress and vulnerability. Every decision, every action, had to consider not only William's health, but the underlying factors that contributed to the emergency. The palace had to address the surface crisis while also acknowledging, even implicitly, the deeper currents of strain that had brought them to this point. Perhaps the most shocking element is how invisible these triggers were to the public eye. Outsiders, journalists, and social media observers see only glimpses: a pale face in a photograph, a tense expression in a public event. But the underlying pressures remain hidden. The true nature of the emergency, insiders say, cannot be understood without appreciating the confluence of stressors, family dynamics, health concerns, and palace routines. It is a reminder that appearances can be deceiving and that even the most visible figures are subject to hidden vulnerabilities. By the time the medical response was fully underway, the palace was left to grapple with not only the immediate crisis, but the realization that these hidden triggers could have long-term implications. How could such pressures be mitigated in the future? How could the family ensure that William's health and well-being were safeguarded against the cumulative weight of expectation, duty, and personal stress? And perhaps most importantly, what had this day revealed about the human cost of life within the monarchy? Even as William was stabilized in the hospital, the investigation into these triggers continued behind closed doors. Staff, advisors, and medical professionals began analyzing the sequence of events, the minor stressors, and the unusual circumstances that converged to create this emergency. Each revelation raised more questions. Had the crisis been predictable? Could intervention have occurred earlier? Were there signals that had been missed, overlooked, or misinterpreted? The answers, sources suggest, are complex, interwoven, and, in some cases, deeply personal. And as the palace reflected on these hidden triggers, one unsettling truth became clear. Understanding the crisis was only the beginning. For the family, the staff, and even the public, the question of how to prevent such a convergence in the future remained unanswered. The forces that had led to William's hospitalization were subtle, multifaceted, and, in many ways, inevitable in a life defined by public scrutiny, relentless duty, and the human vulnerabilities that no crown or title can erase. But just when it seemed the hidden pressures had been identified, an unexpected factor emerged, something so shocking that it threatened to rewrite the narrative of the entire crisis and left everyone, including the most seasoned palace insiders, stunned. What happens when a moment of crisis shifts from the palace corridors into a vehicle hurtling toward a hospital, every second charged with urgency, every heartbeat amplified by fear? Picture this: Prince William, the future king, lying on a stretcher, flanked by a team of medical professionals and security personnel, the ambulance sirens piercing the London air. The world outside carries on unaware, but inside, every movement is calculated, every breath measured, and every second counts. This was the journey from protocol to pure emergency, the ride that would test not only medical expertise, but the resilience of everyone involved. The ambulance itself became a microcosm of the palace's chaos. Within its confined space, doctors worked with rapid precision, monitors beeped incessantly, and the air was filled with a tense energy that refused to dissipate. William, despite his condition, remained conscious, aware of the gravity of the situation. Witnesses report that he tried to communicate, offering instructions or reassurance where he could, but his strength was visibly waning. Every word, every gesture, was punctuated by the knowledge that any delay could prove critical. Security personnel, trained for the extraordinary yet often untested in moments like these, faced a unique challenge. Their role extended beyond protection. They had to ensure that no interruption, no intrusion, and no misstep could compromise the delicate balance of medical care and safety. Their presence was steady, almost silent, yet it radiated authority. Every door opening, every maneuver, every glance had a purpose. The stakes were enormous, and even minor deviations could have catastrophic consequences. Medical teams inside the ambulance were in constant motion, working as both guardians and diagnosticians. They monitored vitals, administered treatments, and communicated continuously with the hospital to prepare for William's arrival. According to sources, each decision was deliberate, executed with a precision that reflected years of training, but also the acute awareness of the extraordinary nature of their patient. The urgency was palpable. This was not a typical medical emergency. This was a royal crisis unfolding in real time. Meanwhile, William's mind was reportedly racing. Imagine the mental strain of being suddenly thrust into a life-threatening situation while simultaneously processing the responsibility of his role, the worry for his family, and the uncertainty of his condition. Insiders suggest that even in his weakened state, he exhibited remarkable composure, trying to provide calm reassurance to those around him while grappling with his own vulnerability. It is a rare glimpse behind the veil of public appearances, where strength often masks the profound human realities beneath. The ambulance ride was also emotionally charged for those accompanying him. Kate, though not physically present inside the ambulance due to safety and protocol, was said to be in constant contact via secure communication, providing guidance and support. Her anxiety, though moderated by composure, was palpable. Every update, every report from the medical team, carried immense emotional weight. Family members outside the vehicle, Charles, senior advisors, and close aides, monitored progress, their own worry amplified by the urgency of the situation. Time in the ambulance seemed to stretch unnaturally. Every moment was simultaneously a test of endurance, precision, and nerves. Each second mattered, yet the minutes felt endless. Staff described the tension as a mix of controlled professionalism and raw fear, an acknowledgement that despite their training, the stakes were unlike anything they had encountered before. The journey itself became a battleground of nerves and skill, where focus was paramount and the slightest distraction could have dramatic consequences. Adding to the intensity was the uncertainty of what awaited at the hospital. While medical teams were prepared, and the route had been carefully chosen. The unknown always looms in emergencies. Insiders note that the team maintained constant communication with hospital staff, providing updates on vitals, anticipated needs, and potential interventions. This coordination was crucial, as it allowed the receiving team to prepare, but it also amplified awareness of the fragility of the situation. The realization that life hangs in the balance creates an almost unbearable tension, one that those inside the ambulance experienced acutely. Outside observers would have seen only flashing lights and heard the wail of sirens, but inside, every beep, every movement, every glance conveyed urgency and care. The human element was at the forefront, doctors acting swiftly, security maintaining calm and order, and a patient aware of the gravity of the situation. It is this combination of expertise, vigilance, and vulnerability that defines critical medical moments, especially when the patient is not just anyone, but a figure whose well-being carries symbolic weight for a nation and a monarchy. During the ride, minor crises unfolded simultaneously. Monitors signaled fluctuations, adjustments were made to stabilize William, and decisions about medication, oxygen, and positioning had to be made instantly. Every adjustment carried potential consequences, and the team's ability to respond effectively was tested repeatedly. Sources describe these moments as intense, each one a high-stakes decision that could influence not only immediate outcomes, but long-term recovery. Perhaps the most striking aspect of the ambulance journey was the juxtaposition of protocol and human emotion. Every action was methodical, trained, and precise, yet the emotional undertones could not be ignored. Staff, despite years of experience, reported moments where the fear of loss was palpable, where the weight of responsibility pressed heavily on even the most composed professionals. Witnesses describe a profound sense of shared purpose. Each individual, from doctor to security officer, understood the gravity of the situation and acted with singular focus, yet the human fear beneath the professionalism was undeniable. For William himself, the experience was transformative. Being in a confined space, under constant monitoring and aware of his own vulnerability, he confronted both physical and emotional challenges. Sources suggest that he reflected, internally, on his family, his responsibilities, and the fragility of life in ways that few outside his inner circle would ever witness. This is a side of royalty rarely seen, a raw exposure of human frailty juxtaposed against the backdrop of centuries-old institution. It is a reminder that behind every public appearance and carefully managed image is a person facing real challenges, just like anyone else. As the ambulance approached the hospital, the intensity did not diminish. Staff prepared for immediate transfer, arranging equipment, coordinating with the emergency department, and maintaining constant vigilance. The final moments of the ride were critical. Every second could influence initial treatment outcomes, and every movement required careful orchestration. The precision and professionalism of the team were essential, but so was the ability to act under pressure, adapting to shifting conditions and responding to unforeseen developments. And yet, even as the hospital loomed ahead, one uncertainty remained: the unknown condition of William upon arrival. Despite careful monitoring and intervention during transit, the full scope of his health crisis was not yet clear. Staff could anticipate complications, but they could not predict everything. And this uncertainty, lingering like a shadow over every decision, added to the tension. Those inside the ambulance understood that what awaited them was not just a medical challenge, but a continuation of a crisis that had begun hours earlier at the palace. Inside, every individual, William, doctors, security personnel, was acutely aware that the journey itself was a critical bridge between crisis and potential stabilization. It was a moment where expertise met uncertainty, where preparation met vulnerability, and where every heartbeat counted. And while the ambulance moved swiftly through London streets, the reality of the situation settled in. The day that had begun as ordinary had now transformed into an ordeal of extraordinary intensity, one that would leave an indelible mark on everyone involved. But as the doors of the hospital swung open, and the team prepared to transition William into intensive care, a revelation awaited. Something so unexpected, so shocking, that even the most experienced medical professionals paused in disbelief. What happens when the tension of a royal crisis moves from the confines of an ambulance into the stark, bright lights of a hospital emergency room? The moment Prince William was wheeled through those automatic doors, the reality of the situation hit with a new intensity. For the first time, the palace's carefully controlled environment gave way entirely to the unfiltered urgency of medical intervention. Doctors, nurses, and support staff faced the challenge of not just treating a critical patient, but doing so under the extraordinary circumstances of royalty, public scrutiny, and a family's mounting fear. The ER was immediately transformed. Staff who had trained for high-pressure scenarios now found themselves in the presence of someone whose life carried both symbolic and literal weight. Every heartbeat mattered, every vital sign was scrutinized, and every decision had consequences that extended far beyond the patient himself. Prince William, the future king, was suddenly humanized in a way the public rarely witnesses, vulnerable, dependent, and completely in the hands of those around him. Doctors began with rapid assessments. Monitors beeped continuously, labs were drawn, and scans were prepared. William, despite the severity of his condition, reportedly tried to communicate, offering brief reassurances or instructions when he could. His awareness, even amid distress, added a layer of complexity. Medical staff needed to act with speed and precision while maintaining sensitivity to the patient's status as a public figure and future monarch. This dual pressure created an environment where focus was absolute, but the stakes were almost unimaginable. Meanwhile, the family's anxiety was palpable. Kate, who had maintained composure during the ambulance ride, now had to reconcile her own fear with the need to support staff and communicate with the broader palace. Charles and other senior family members, though not physically present, were in constant contact, receiving updates and weighing decisions in real time. The emotional strain was intense. Even seasoned aides described the atmosphere as tense, almost electric, charged with the urgency of life and death decisions coupled with the emotional weight of a family crisis. And then came the revelation. As initial assessments were completed, doctors discovered something unexpected. While insiders have remained tight-lipped on specifics, sources describe the findings as startling and entirely unanticipated. A piece of the puzzle that explained both the sudden nature of William's collapse and the intensity of the palace's response. The revelation was not just medical. It connected back to the hidden pressures discussed earlier, providing insight into how accumulated stress, physical strain, and perhaps underlying conditions converged into a moment of critical emergency. The medical team moved swiftly, prioritizing immediate stabilization. Oxygen, intravenous fluids, and monitoring equipment were deployed in rapid succession. Specialists were summoned, each bringing expertise tailored to the complexity of the situation. The challenge was monumental. Not only did they have to address the immediate physiological crisis, but they also had to anticipate potential complications, all while balancing the unique factors involved in treating a royal patient. Every decision was calculated, every adjustment deliberate, and every action carried consequences that extended beyond the hospital walls. Amid this intense focus, one factor stood out: William's remarkable composure. Despite being in critical condition, he reportedly remained aware, processing instructions, and communicating when possible. This presence of mind, while subtle, allowed medical staff to make more informed decisions and coordinate interventions more effectively. It also highlighted a key truth. Even in extreme vulnerability, leadership, awareness, and resilience remain integral to survival. William's calm, amidst crisis, became a stabilizing force, not just for the medical team, but for those who loved him. Yet, while the medical interventions were underway, the broader implications of the revelation were beginning to surface. Insiders suggest that the discovery raised questions about long-term management of William's health, the need for adjustments to his schedule and responsibilities, and the importance of ongoing support for both physical and emotional well-being. The emergency revealed that the hidden pressures he had been under were not just acute. They were systemic, requiring careful attention and management moving forward. As updates were relayed to palace advisors, the shock was immediate. The revelation prompted swift reassessment of priorities, both medical and logistical. Contingency plans were revised, communications were coordinated, and every step was taken to ensure the crisis remained contained while providing the best possible care for William. The juxtaposition of private emergency and public expectation was acute. The world, largely unaware of the unfolding crisis, would soon learn fragments, while those inside the palace grappled with the full intensity of the truth. The emotional resonance of this revelation cannot be overstated. Staff described moments of pause, where the gravity of the situation sank in. For Kate, it was a blend of fear, relief at having an explanation, and renewed anxiety about the path ahead. For medical personnel, it was a challenge tempered by clarity. The knowledge of the underlying issue allowed for precise intervention, but it also underscored the fragility of the patient and the stakes of the moment. Meanwhile, security personnel maintained strict perimeter control, ensuring that the hospital environment remained secure and that all movements were carefully monitored. The balance between open medical care and protective secrecy was delicate. Every visitor, every staff member, every procedure had to be managed with both efficiency and discretion. The hospital became not just a site of treatment, but a fortress of focus, guarding both a critical patient and the integrity of the royal institution. As interventions progressed, William's condition began to stabilize, but uncertainty remained. While the revelation had provided clarity, it also highlighted the complexity of the crisis and the potential for complications. Each test, each adjustment, each monitoring period was critical. Staff worked tirelessly, aware that even minor fluctuations could influence outcomes. And in these moments, the reality of the royal emergency became unmistakable. Life, status, and symbolism had converged in a way that few outside the palace had ever witnessed. By evening, the initial shock of the revelation had set the stage for broader reflection. Insiders described discussions among medical teams and palace advisors about preventive measures, long-term management, and strategies for reducing stress and health risks in the future. The emergency had illuminated vulnerabilities that extended beyond William's immediate condition, raising questions about lifestyle, workload, and the unique pressures inherent in royal life. Yet even as the situation showed signs of stabilization, a lingering tension persisted. The revelation, while critical to understanding the emergency, also hinted at deeper challenges, factors that had yet to be fully addressed and that might continue to influence William's health and well-being in the days, weeks, and years ahead. The interplay between immediate crisis and ongoing vulnerability became the central focus for staff and family alike, reinforcing the delicate balance of care, protection, and oversight required when the future king's life is at stake. And just as the initial shock of the revelation was beginning to settle, another unexpected development emerged, something so consequential that it would challenge the family, the palace, and even medical professionals in ways no one could have anticipated. What does it mean to be the partner of someone facing a life-threatening crisis while the world watches and every heartbeat feels like an eternity? For Kate, the Duchess of Cambridge, the day of Prince William's hospitalization was not just a test of composure. It was a profound emotional ordeal, one that revealed the human vulnerability behind the polished public image. Behind the calm smiles and graceful gestures she displays at public events, Kate faced a storm of fear, uncertainty, and relentless responsibility that few could truly comprehend. From the moment William was rushed into the ambulance, Kate's mind was racing. She had to balance immediate concern for her husband's survival with the need to coordinate with palace staff, medical personnel, and security teams. Every decision mattered, every instruction had consequences, and yet she had to maintain a level of composure that would prevent panic from spreading. Staff recall moments where she was both fiercely proactive and emotionally raw, issuing precise directives while struggling to control the surge of fear threatening to overwhelm her. The emotional weight of the situation was immense. Kate had to consider not only William's physical condition, but also the emotional impact on their children, George, Charlotte, and Louis. Though they were shielded from the full intensity of the crisis, Kate was acutely aware that children are remarkably perceptive, absorbing tension even when it is carefully masked. She worked to maintain routines, offer reassurance, and provide a sense of stability, all while grappling with her own fear and uncertainty. It was a balancing act that required emotional fortitude, quick thinking, and extraordinary resilience. As the ambulance carried William to the hospital, Kate remained in constant contact, using secure communication lines to receive updates and relay instructions. Sources describe her as deeply involved in every stage of the process, advocating for her husband, coordinating logistics, and making rapid decisions in a pressure cooker environment. She monitored medical updates, ensured security protocols were followed, and simultaneously tried to maintain a semblance of calm for the staff and family members around her. The emotional toll, insiders suggest, was nearly unbearable, yet she continued to function with remarkable composure. Inside the hospital, Kate's ordeal intensified. She was present during critical assessments, watching as medical professionals worked to stabilize William. Each beep of a monitor, each adjustment of a medical instrument, carried profound significance. Observers note that she alternated between moments of controlled composure, supporting staff, advocating for William's care, and quiet bursts of vulnerability, stepping away briefly to process her own fear. These glimpses of humanity reminded staff and onlookers that behind the titles and public appearances were real people confronting extraordinary stress.